I'd like to bring up Jamie Coriano. Jamie is Vice President of Sales and Business Development at Flexon. He has 25 years of experience in semiconductors, electronic components, and cybersecurity. His vision and strategy has greatly impacted the success of his clients in the Americas. He has most recently been involved in the emerging cybersecurity solutions based on hardware-level AI-based protection against ransomware, data cloning, and physical attacks. We're going to follow on to the data first section.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Jamie Coriano, Vice President of Sales for Flexon. Today we're going to talk about, the previous presenters were talking about the different layers of protection and how the attacks continue to evade some of those protections. And we're going to talk about another layer of protection, which is at the hardware level, using an SSD with embedded AI to protect the data. So it was well documented already that ransomware attacks continue to evolve, continue to grow. And when you consider that this is happening to very large corporations with very large IT departments, great budgets to spend on their defense, and they're still being hacked, they're still being penetrated by these attacks, it's clear that the defenses have to evolve, and this is where the hardware-based security using AI and SSD is going to come into play. So how exactly we do that? First, it would be good to compare what an existing SSD is doing. Basically, the SSD is relying on external protection, whether it's the operating system, antivirus, firewall protection, but all the protection is outside of the drive itself. So if those protections are breached, then the drive doesn't have any way to defend itself against these attacks, and the hacker has your data. On the other hand, if you look at the graphic below, when the drive has an AI engine in it, it's going to monitor the I/O to the drive, so the protection is actually within the drive, it's in firmware. So if the external protection, whether it's antivirus, firewall, the operating system, there's a breach there when the attacker tries to enter the SSD and access the data, it's going to be blocked by the AI. And on the next slide, I'm going to explain how this is going to work. So basically what the AI is doing, it's going to monitor, the commands are going to come in to the controller via the NVMe bus. The controller is going to look at the attributes of these commands, the I/O commands, the read-write commands, and it's going to extract those attributes, feed them to the AI core. The AI core is then going to make a decision based on these attributes to see if this is a normal user application or if there's an attack taking place. If it's normal operation, the I/O actions are going to be taken onto a flash. The data is going to move in and out of the flash. But if it's an attack, the AI is going to shut down the drive, it's going to lock down the data, and it's going to prevent any breach from happening. So a little bit more detail on what the AI is doing is basically it's going to extract the attributes from the I/O patterns, the read-write patterns. It's going to generate a spectrum to be able to identify what these patterns mean, whether it's normal operation or abnormal operation. It's going to teach itself what normal is versus what an attack might be. And then it's going to update its own database to be able to identify or differentiate between normal operation and an attack. Now, it's important to point out that the user at this point is not doing anything. Once the protection is enabled in the beginning of the setup process, the user doesn't have to do anything anymore. So the protection does not rely on a human to continue to update their antivirus database or practice good cyber hygiene. This is all happening outside of human intervention. So this is just one of the attributes that the AI is monitoring. In this case, it's a read pattern. So if you look at typical programs somebody might use, depending on how you look at the patterns, they may look similar to a human. But when the AI is looking at these patterns, and this is the power spectrum of different operations, it can make decisions based on these power patterns. This is not something that the ransomware can fake. It's an immutable characteristic of the I/O pattern. And this is only one of over 20 attributes that the drive is actually looking at. So you can see from an AI point of view, it's very easy to identify what is normal, benign operation, and what is an attack. So the other advantage of this approach is that the AI doesn't need to know, the drive doesn't need to know who's attacking me or what type of an attack it is. So it's very effective against a zero-day threat. There is no antivirus database to update. There's none of that. So it doesn't need to know what the attacker is trying to do. It just knows it's an attack and reacts to it. So that's a good example of, say, a ransomware attack. But there are two other types of attacks that can happen, obviously, and it could be a data cloning attack, and then later I will talk about a physical attack. So for the clone protection, if you look at when the drive boots up, the AI is going to map the drive and see what the startup configuration is of that drive. It's going to see the user operation as the user continues to use the equipment, the machine. And then when you compare those two patterns to what it looks like in terms of operations, when you're trying to clone the drive, a partition of the drive, or do a disk image, you can see that it's pretty distinct I/O patterns. And this is what the AI is taking into consideration when making a decision. So the protection or the clone protection mechanism is built into the firmware, to the hardware of the drive. So again, it's not something external in terms of software, it's within the drive itself. So the drive is protecting itself against the attack. And what's scary about this type of attack is that it could be happening in the background without the user knowing that the data is being stolen. So the attack could take place, the data could be gone, and you have no idea what just happened. Until the ransomware or the attacker decides they want to do something with that data or hold it for ransom. Of course, you might be thinking at this point, well, Jimmy, what if I want to back up my own drive or perform a cloning operation on my own drive? You can turn this protection off, you can perform the backup operation or the cloning, whatever you need to do, and then enable it when you're done. So the last type of attack I'm going to talk about is a physical attack. So what happens if you forget your laptop at a taxi cab in New York? Or what happens if somebody breaks into your company and steals servers, laptops, wherever it is? So that's the type of attack I'm going to address here. So one of the ways that they can try to gain access to your data would be to using a heat source to try to disable or bypass the two-factor authentication on your drive and then extract the data this way. So for this type of an attack, the drive has temperature sensors that will detect the sudden change in temperature because it's constantly monitoring this temperature. And if it detects an attack, it's going to lock down the drive and protect your data. Another thing they can try to do, or another layer of protection, would be light sensors in the drive detecting whether a server has been opened, light is suddenly entering the server. Again, these are protections that can be turned off by the user if you need to perform maintenance and other tasks on your system. You can turn this off. But when they're enabled, it's going to have light sensors going to detect light, and it's going to detect that as an attack. When these attacks are happening, you have a couple different ways you can respond to the attack. One of them, kind of extreme, but it may be necessary in some cases, is to do a purge of the drive. The moment the attack is detected, if you have critical data that you want to make sure it doesn't fall in somebody's hands, then you can purge the drive, and basically nothing will be left. The data will be purged, all serials will be written to the drive, and it's not going to be able to be recovered at that point. Of course, if you don't want to have that response, you can just have the normal response, which would be to lock down the drive and enable the user later to unlock the drive and recover from it. So one of the things I'll mention here is the recovery time that Simon was talking about is crucial. So in the case of this type of an approach, you can recover very quickly. It's a matter of minutes. So because what you're going to be able to do is once the drive goes in lockdown mode, you can connect to the drive using Bluetooth or some other methodology depending on the setup. And then with the Bluetooth app, you can authenticate onto the drive. Once you're authenticated, you can unlock the drive, boot up, and you're back in business. You can do this in less than 5 minutes, right? So there's no recovery time. Your data's still there. It wasn't held for ransom, but now you know you've been attacked, so you can take you can look at other mechanisms of protection to prevent future attacks. But your data's still there, and it's not held for ransom, and you can recover quickly. So why is this more effective? I think some of the reasons I already gave you make it pretty obvious, but it's effective against zero-day threats. It's effective because it's all inside of the drive. It's not relying on external protections to protect the drive. It's closest to the data, right? So it's the last line of defense in essence. So when all the other security measures have failed, you can still protect your data. Very low false positive rates. Very small fraction of 1%. And again, it's only looking at the I/O operations of the drive. It's only looking at the read-write operations. When you have a protection that is external to the drive and software, you don't know where the attack is coming from. You don't know what type of attack it might be. So you have to look at everything. But when you're this type of protection using the AI and the firmware and the drive itself, you only have to look at the I/O pattern. You only have to look at the read-write patterns. You don't have to look at everything. So it's very effective in recognizing an attack at this level. So here's an example of where this protection can be effective. It's just one of many use cases. But in this day and age, you have a lot of people working from home or working remotely. And again, if we go back to the beginning when we talked about how these companies with large IT departments are still being breached. Now imagine if those same companies have hundreds, if not thousands of employees working in many locations, some remotely, areas where the Wi-Fi may not be protected, somebody's home, some coffee shop, etc. So, of course, humans make mistakes, and a lot of the attacks happen because somebody makes a mistake or doesn't practice proper cyber hygiene. It's happened to all of us, I'm sure, at one point or another. Then you have a breach, and you have an attack. So if your system is protected with this SSD with AI in the hardware, then the attack is going to be detected, it's going to be stopped, you will be notified that you've been attacked, the drive will be locked down, you'll be able to recover quickly where your data is secure. And then your IT department can now look at that event because the drive keeps a data log of everything that happens and see where the attack came from, what type of attack it was, IP addresses, etc. So it allows you for a quick recovery. Now, this is just one scenario in a client environment. This scenario could be many different types of scenarios. This is just one example. So where we are today is basically where the scenario I just pointed out is endpoint security or client security or an edge server type of a scenario. But then the next point is to look at the entire system, the entire ecosystem of the company. You're looking at the manufacturing side, at the operational side of the company, not just the IT department. That has to be protected, particularly in critical infrastructure applications. So we go from the client end security to the system-wide security, and then we expand into the certification and the different additional layers of protection, FIPS 140-2, common criteria, etc. So in summary, the idea behind the cybersecure SSD enhanced with AI is self-contained protection, does not depend on the user to react. It's effective against zero-day threats, and it's not software, so it cannot be bypassed. It's all within the drive itself. So in essence, the drive can protect you from yourself. Thank you.